The Afghan sun beat down mercilessly on forward operating base Condor, a collection of dusty buildings and barriers carved into the unforgiving mountainside. Heat waves shimmered above the ground as soldiers moved between structures, their faces glistening with sweat, despite the early morning hour. The barren landscape stretched for miles in every direction, broken only by jagged mountain ridges and the occasional plume of dust from passing vehicles. Emma Morgan moved with purpose across the base, her small frame weighed down by a 40-pound pack of ammunition. Standing just 5'4", the 23-year-old supply specialist looked almost comical, carrying the oversized load, but there was nothing humorous about the determination etched on her face. Her olive-green t-shirt was already dark with sweat, her sandy blonde hair pulled back tightly into a regulation bun that revealed sharp, attentive eyes, constantly scanning her surroundings. "Mouse, get your ass over here with that ammo!" A burly sergeant bellowed from across the compound, using the nickname that had stuck since her first week of basic training. Emma picked up her pace, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust as she navigated between concrete barriers. The nickname had started as an insult, a jab at her small stature, but had evolved into something closer to respect once her unit discovered her uncanny ability to slip through tight spaces and move with surprising stealth during training exercises. What she lacked in size, she made up for in speed and precision. "Coming, Sergeant," she called back, adjusting the heavy pack on her shoulders. The roar of helicopter rotors suddenly filled the air as a Black Hawk thundered overhead, casting a momentary shadow across the base. The sound triggered a flash of memory. Another helicopter, another time back in the mountains of Montana, where she'd grown up. 10 years earlier. Bitterroot Mountains, Montana. The cold mountain air bit at Emma's cheeks as she followed her grandfather through the dense pine forest. William Morgan moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew every inch of these mountains, his weathered hands gripping his old Remington hunting rifle with casual familiarity. "Remember what I taught you about the wind, Emmy," he said, his voice barely audible above the breeze rustling through the trees. "It's not just what you feel on your face. Watch the treetops, watch the grass. The wind at your position isn't the same as the wind between you and your target." 13-year-old Emma nodded, clutching her own smaller rifle, a gift from her grandfather on her 12th birthday. William Morgan was a legend in their small Montana town, a former Marine Corps sniper who'd served in the Korean War before being recruited by the CIA for operations during the Cold War. Though he rarely spoke of those days, the quiet authority in his voice when he did share fragments of his past left a deep impression on his granddaughter. "Patience," he continued, crouching down behind a fallen log and motioning for Emma to join him. "The difference between a good shot and a great one isn't just about aim. It's about waiting for exactly the right moment." They settled into position overlooking a small clearing. William pulled out a weathered notebook, its pages filled with neat columns of numbers and observations. "Always keep records," he explained, jotting down the temperature, wind speed, and humidity. "Your memory will fail you. Your notes won't." Hours passed in comfortable silence as William taught Emma to read the forest, to sense changes in the wind before they happened, to recognize animal patterns to control her breathing until her heartbeat and the world around her seemed to synchronize. When a buck finally appeared at the edge of the clearing, William didn't rush her. "Take your time," he whispered. "Breathe in, hold, then squeeze between heartbeats." The rifle's report echoed through the mountains, and the buck dropped cleanly. Emma's first successful hunt. That night, as they sat before the fireplace in William's cabin, Her grandfather pulled an old metal box from beneath his bed. Inside was a worn leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. "There's more to shooting than hunting, Emmy," he said, his voice taking on a gravity she rarely heard. "Sometimes it's about protecting people who can't protect themselves." He opened the journal, revealing detailed notes, sketches of positions and calculations that went far beyond what he'd shown her in the forest. "Someday I'll teach you everything I know. Not because I want you to follow in my footsteps, but because knowledge once gained should never be lost." The memory dissolved as a nearby explosion jolted Emma back to the present. Not close enough to be a direct threat, but a stark reminder that Forward Operating Base Condor sat in contested territory. She quickened her pace, delivering the ammunition to the waiting sergeant before heading to her next assignment, inventory at the armory. The armory was her favorite place on base, not just because it was one of the few air-conditioned buildings, but because during quiet periods, the master sergeant who ran it sometimes let her handle the specialized weapons. Emma had particularly taken to the M110 semi-automatic sniper system, studying its manual when no one was looking and memorizing its specifications until she could recite them in her sleep. As she entered the armory's relative cool, a figure stepped from the shadows. A tall, lean man in his early 60s with close-cropped silver hair and the ramrod-straight posture that screamed military lifer. Captain Jack Iron Reynolds wasn't part of her direct chain of command, but his role as Special Operations Advisor made him a respected presence on base. The deep lines etched around his eyes spoke of decades under harsh suns in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. "Specialist Morgan." He nodded, his voice carrying the gravelly quality of someone who'd spent too many years barking orders. "I heard you were heading to the range yesterday during your off hours." Emma stiffened slightly. "Yes, sir. Just trying to maintain proficiency, sir." Reynolds studied her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. "Perfect score at 600 meters with a standard issue M4. That's beyond maintaining proficiency, wouldn't you say?" Heat rose to Emma's cheeks. "I enjoy shooting, sir. Grew up with it." "Montana, right?" Reynolds asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Your file says your grandfather raised you." "Yes, sir. William Morgan." Something flickered across Reynolds's face. Recognition, perhaps, or something deeper. "William Morgan," he repeated slowly. "Marine Corps, Korea. Then other assignments." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. Most people only knew about her grandfather's Marine service. The other assignments had never appeared in any official record she'd seen. "You knew my grandfather, sir." Reynolds seemed to consider his next words carefully. "We crossed paths. Long time ago." He paused, then changed the subject abruptly. "Tell me, Specialist, what do you think about the intel briefing for tomorrow's operation?" The question caught her off guard. Supply specialists like her weren't typically asked for opinions on operational intelligence. Still, Emma had read every scrap of information available about the upcoming mission. A raid on a compound suspected of housing a high-value target, a bomb maker responsible for dozens of American casualties. "With respect, sir, something doesn't add up," she said cautiously. "The informant who provided the target location has no prior history with our intelligence assets. The compound's location offers multiple escape routes, but limited approach vectors for our forces. And the topography surrounding it creates perfect firing positions for anyone wanting to set up an ambush." Reynolds' expression remained neutral, but a hint of something, approval perhaps, glinted in his steel-gray eyes. "Most of your superiors seem comfortable with the intelligence," he noted. Emma squared her shoulders. "Most of my superiors haven't spent their lives studying firing positions, sir." Reynolds' mouth twitched. almost a smile, but not quite. "Your grandfather taught you well." He turned to leave, then paused. "Sometimes the most valuable skill isn't being able to hit a target, Morgan. It's knowing which targets shouldn't be approached in the first place." After he left, Emma returned to her inventory duties with renewed focus, Reynolds's words playing on repeat in her mind. As she worked, her hand brushed against the small leather pouch she always kept tucked inside her uniform, the final gift her grandfather had given her before his death 6 months ago, just weeks before her deployment. That night, alone in her quarters, Emma carefully opened the pouch and removed its contents. A small, worn leather notebook, similar to the one she'd seen as a child, but clearly older, its pages more fragile. William had given it to her on his deathbed, his once strong hands trembling as he pressed it into hers. "There are things never told you, Emmy," he'd whispered, his voice weak but urgent. "Things about my time with the agency. This journal contains records of missions not in any official file. Someday you might need to know." Emma had accepted the journal, but hadn't found the courage to read it until weeks later after she'd arrived in Afghanistan. What she discovered inside stunned her. Detailed accounts of covert operations throughout Europe during the Cold War, precision shots made at distances considered impossible at the time, and cryptic references to something called Operation Red Storm. But it was the final entry that had truly shaken her. Dated October 1983, Berlin. Her grandfather had been tasked with eliminating a Soviet operative named Ivan Kozlov, a legendary sniper working for the KGB. The mission had failed, the only failure recorded in the entire journal. William's final notes were uncharacteristically personal. "Kozlov escaped. He saw my face. This will not end here." Now, as Emma carefully returned the journal to its hiding place, Captain Reynolds's interest in her grandfather took on new significance. Had they worked together during those classified Cold War operations? And if so, why hadn't Reynolds simply said so? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found a sealed envelope with her name typed on the front. No sender. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message: 0500, firing range 3, come alone, Dr. R. Sleep did not come easily that night. The sky was still dark when Emma arrived at firing range 3, the most isolated of the base's shooting facilities, typically reserved for special operations training. The first hints of dawn were just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. She had arrived 15 minutes early, a habit instilled by her grandfather. If you're not early, you're late. Captain Reynolds was already there, his silhouette unmistakable against the lightening sky. Next to him on a folding table lay a weapon Emma recognized immediately. An M110 semi-automatic sniper system, the same model she'd been studying in the armory. "Right on time, Morgan," Reynolds said without turning around. "You said 0500, sir." Emma stood at attention, unsure of what to expect. At ease. Reynolds finally turned to face her, his expression serious. "What I'm about to discuss with you doesn't leave this range. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Reynolds gestured to the weapon. "Show me what you can do with this." Emma hesitated only briefly before moving to the table. She checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, inspecting the chamber, examining the magazine, adjusting the scope. Reynolds watched silently as she settled into position, her movements fluid and natural. The targets were set at varying distances from 300 to 900 meters. Without being instructed, Emma began with the closest, then systematically worked her way out to the furthest. Each shot found its mark. Center mass, no wasted rounds. When she finished, she cleared the weapon and stood. Reynolds hadn't moved during her demonstration, his face unreadable. Your grandfather taught you more than just hunting, I see. He believed in being thorough, sir. William Morgan was one of the finest marksmen I ever knew, Reynolds said quietly. But more importantly, he understood that a good shot isn't worth a damn without good judgment behind it. He motioned for Emma to follow him to a small tent set up at the edge of the range, away from potential observers or listening devices. Inside a map was spread across a portable table along with several surveillance photos. I knew your grandfather Morgan. Not just knew him, I worked with him, closely, for years. Reynolds's voice had dropped to just above a whisper. We were part of a special CIA operations unit during the Cold War, the kind that officially never existed. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Operation Red Storm, she said before she could stop herself. Reynolds's eyes narrowed. He told you about that? Not exactly, sir. Emma hesitated, then decided to trust her instincts. He left me his journal. I've read parts of it. For the first time, genuine surprise registered on Reynolds's weathered face. Then he nodded slowly, as if something had just clicked into place. That explains a few things. He tapped one of the surveillance photos. This was taken 3 days ago by one of our recon drones about 15 kilometers from here. The grainy image showed a man moving through a mountain pass, face partially obscured by a scarf, but his bearing and the way he carried his rifle unmistakably military. We've identified him as Viktor Koslov, Reynolds continued. Russian national former Spetsnaz, now a freelance operator working with various terrorist groups. Expert marksman with confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Koslov, she repeated. As in Ivan Koslov, the Soviet sniper my grandfather failed to eliminate in Berlin. Reynolds's eyebrows rose slightly. That journal of his must be more detailed than I thought. He nodded grimly. Victor is Ivan's son, and he's here in Afghanistan in our area of operations right when we're preparing for a high-value target mission. You think he's connected to tomorrow's operation? Emma asked, her mind racing. I think there are no coincidences in this business. Reynolds pointed to the map indicating the compound that was the target of the planned raid. Everything about this setup feels wrong. The intelligence is too convenient, the target too exposed, yet simultaneously too well-positioned for an ambush. He fixed Emma with an intense stare. Your instincts were right yesterday. This mission has all the hallmarks of a trap. And now we have a world-class sniper with a potential grudge against Americans, or possibly a very specific grudge, operating in the area. Emma tried to process this information. Sir, why are you telling me this? I'm just a supply specialist. Reynolds's laugh was short and without humor. A supply specialist who shoots like a trained marksman and has the tactical instincts to spot an ambush from a briefing packet. Don't play dumb, Morgan. It doesn't suit you. He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. I've spent the last 20 years watching for signs of Koslov's organization, what we called Red Storm back in the day. Former KGB agents and their associates who never accepted that the Cold War ended. They've been quiet for years, but recently there have been whispers, movements. And now this. Emma frowned. What does this have to do with tomorrow's mission? Lieutenant Hayes and his SEAL team are walking into a trap, Reynolds said bluntly. I've tried to warn command, but without concrete evidence, they're proceeding as planned. The intelligence comes from sources they trust, and the target is too high value to pass up. And you think I can help? How exactly? Emma asked, though she was beginning to understand. Tomorrow's mission has no designated marksman for Overwatch. Their usual sniper was medevaced last week with appendicitis. Reynolds tapped the M110 rifle. Someone needs to watch their backs. Emma stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, with all due respect, I'm not qualified for that role. I'm not even in their unit." "No, you're not," Reynolds agreed. "But you might be the only person on this base who could save their lives, if I'm right about Kozlov." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "I saw your qualification scores, Morgan. I've watched you at the range. You have your grandfather's gift." Emma felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. "Have you told Lieutenant Hayes about this? About your suspicions?" Reynolds's expression darkened. "Hayes is a good operator, but he's young arrogant. Believes his team is invincible. When I tried to raise concerns, he dismissed them as the paranoid ramblings of an old cold warrior." He straightened, decision made. "I'm not asking you to volunteer for this, Morgan. Officially, I can't ask you to do anything. But that rifle will be secured in a locker at Observation Post Charlie, half a click east of the compound. The combination is 1983. If something goes wrong tomorrow, if my instincts are right, those men might need someone watching over them." Emma nodded slowly, understanding the impossible position they were both in. "One more thing," Reynolds added, his voice grave. "If Viktor Kozlov is involved in this, it's not just about tomorrow's mission. William Morgan was more than just another operative to Ivan Kozlov. Their rivalry was personal. And if Viktor has followed in his father's footsteps, finding you, William's granddaughter, might be exactly why he's here." As the implications sank in, the rising sun finally crested the eastern mountains, bathing the firing range in harsh golden light. The new day had arrived, bringing with it decisions that could not be undone. The operations center hummed with activity as final preparations for the raid continued. Maps and satellite imagery covered the walls, while communications specialists monitored radio frequencies and drone feeds. Lieutenant Jason Hayes stood at the center of it all, his athletic frame tense with pre-mission energy as he briefed his 8-man SEAL team. At 32, Hayes had already completed 4 combat deployments, earning a reputation as one of the most aggressive and successful team leaders in the special operations community. His square jaw and perpetual 5 o'clock shadow gave him the appearance of a movie star playing a soldier, an image he seemed to cultivate with calculated precision. Emma stood near the back of the room, officially present, to distribute specialized ammunition for the operation, but in reality listening intently to every detail of the mission plan. The target compound was located in a narrow valley surrounded by steep, rocky slopes, perfect terrain for snipers to control the battlefield. As Hayes finished his briefing and the team began to disperse, Emma approached him with the ammunition case. "Your specialized rounds, sir," she said, setting the case on the table. She hesitated, then added, "Lieutenant, I noticed something about the approach route you selected." Hayes glanced up, barely acknowledging her presence. "What about its specialist?" "Morgan, sir. Emma Morgan." She pointed to the map indicating the planned insertion point. "This route takes you through a narrow pass with high ground on both sides. If someone were positioning shooters, they'd have clean lines of sight for nearly 800 meters. Hayes straightened, giving Emma his full attention for the first time. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the small, seemingly unremarkable supply specialist who had just critiqued his tactical planning. "You're the ammunition carrier," he stated flatly. "Since when does logistics weigh in on special operations planning?" Emma held her ground. "Just an observation, sir. The topography creates a natural choke point. There are alternative approaches that offer more cover." Several of the SEALs had paused to watch the exchange, their expressions ranging from amusement to annoyance. Hayes glanced at his team, then back at Emma, his jaw tightening. "SEAL team doesn't need a girl hauling ammo to tell us how to run an operation," he said, his voice deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. We've been doing this since before you finished high school specialist. Emma felt heat rise to her face, but kept her expression neutral. Understood, sir. Just thought it was worth mentioning. As she turned to leave, Hayes called after her. Hey, Mouse. He'd clearly heard her nickname. Stick to counting bullets. Leave the fighting to those qualified for it. The operations center fell silent, all eyes on Emma. She nodded once sharply and walked out her back ramrod straight, refusing to show how deeply the dismissal had stung. Outside, she nearly collided with Captain Reynolds, who had clearly overheard the exchange. He's going to get them killed, she said quietly, once they were alone. Reynolds nodded grimly. Pride is a luxury combat leaders can't afford. He studied her face. What will you do? Emma thought of her grandfather, of the lessons he'd taught her about responsibility and duty. She thought of the rifle waiting at observation post Charlie, and of Victor Kozlov, possibly watching even now from the surrounding mountains. What I have to, sir. That evening, as twilight settled over the base, Emma made her way to the small chapel, the one place on base where she could be assured of privacy. Sitting in the last pew, she removed her grandfather's journal from its pouch and turned to the Berlin entry once more. October 17th, 1983. Berlin, Target. Ivan Koslov, KGB operative, master sniper. Mission parameters eliminate with extreme prejudice due to his role in the assassination of 3 CIA assets in East Berlin. Intelligence indicates he will be at the safe house on Kranoldstrasse between 0200 to 0400 hours. Mission failed. Koslov was not alone. Had his young son with him, approximately 10 years old. Could not take the shot with the child present. When I repositioned, Koslov detected my presence. Firefight ensued. I wounded him, but he escaped with the boy. Critical error, hesitation. Koslov saw my face. He knows who I am now. This will not end here. Agency is extracting me immediately. Operation Red Storm compromised. Note: Kozlov's technique is distinctive. Prefers to work alone, uses environmental factors to disguise shot signature. Often employs multiple false firing positions before taking final position. Patient beyond normal human tolerance. Not just a shooter, a hunter. Emma closed the journal, her grandfather's final warning echoing in her mind. Koslov was a hunter, not just a shooter. And now his son might be hunting her. Dawn was still hours away when Emma slipped out of her quarters, dressed in full combat gear, her movement hidden by the base's pre-mission activities. No one questioned another soldier preparing for the day's operation. She made her way to the motor pool, where a sand-colored Humvee sat idling. Captain Reynolds stood beside it, checking his own equipment. He glanced up as she approached, his expression grim but approving. Last chance to reconsider, he said quietly. Not an option, sir, Emma replied, climbing into the passenger seat. Reynolds nodded once, then got behind the wheel. Then, let's go save some SEALs. As they drove through the base's main gate, the eastern sky still dark and star-filled, neither spoke. The weight of what lay ahead, the rules they were breaking, the risks they were taking, hung heavy between them. Finally, as they turned onto the rough track that would take them toward observation post, Charlie Reynolds broke the silence. There's something you should know, Morgan, he said, his eyes fixed on the rugged path ahead. I wasn't just your grandfather's colleague. We were in Berlin together that night in '83. Emma turned to stare at him, momentarily speechless. William didn't tell you everything in that journal, Reynolds continued. The reason he couldn't take the shot when he had Koslov in his sights It wasn't just because the boy was there. He paused the Humvee, bouncing over the uneven terrain. It was because I was supposed to be his spotter, and I wasn't in position. I'd been delayed at a checkpoint. William was alone without backup, making a call no sniper should have to make by themselves. The implications sank in slowly. "You blame yourself," Emma said softly. Reynolds' knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "For 30 years. And now Victor Kozlov is here, possibly continuing what his father started." His gaze flicked briefly to Emma. "Your grandfather saved my life more times than I can count. I couldn't save him from Kozlov then. But maybe I can help save his granddaughter now." As the first hints of dawn lightened the sky, they reached Observation Post Charlie, little more than a rocky outcropping with a small camouflaged shelter built into the hillside. From this position, they had a clear view of the valley below, including the compound that was the SEAL team's target, and the narrow pass they would use for their approach. Inside the shelter, as promised, was a locked case containing the M110 rifle. Reynolds entered the combination, 1983, and opened it to reveal the precision weapon nestled in protective foam, along with extra magazines and a spotter's scope. Emma lifted the rifle with practiced hands, checking it methodically as her grandfather had taught her. Reynolds watched her work, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You move just like him," he said quietly. Emma didn't respond, focusing instead on preparing her position. She laid out her gear precisely, rangefinder wind gauge notebook for calculations. Only when everything was in place did she speak. "They're coming," she said, nodding toward the valley below, where the faint dust cloud of approaching vehicles could be seen. Lieutenant Hayes and his SEAL team were right on schedule. Reynolds took up position with the spotter's scope. "Two-man spotter team on the North Ridge," he reported after a moment. "Another on the eastern approach. Professional positioning well concealed. I wouldn't have seen them if I wasn't looking specifically." Emma's stomach tightened. "It is a trap. We need to warn Hayes." Reynolds reached for his radio. "Wait," Emma said, studying the terrain through her scope. "There's someone else. Look at the outcropping above the eastern spotter team. See that slight distortion in the rock face?" Reynolds adjusted his scope, then nodded grimly. "Ghillie suit, high-end, military grade." "That's our primary target," Emma said with certainty. "The others are just the outer ring. That's Kozlov." Reynolds keyed his radio, switching to the SEAL team's frequency. "Overwatch to Shark Lead. Be advised you have multiple hostile shooters positioned along your approach route." "This is a trap. Repeat, this is a trap." Static answered him, then Lieutenant Hayes's voice tense with suppressed anger. "Who the hell is this on my frequency? Identify yourself." "This is Captain Reynolds. I'm at OP Charlie with eyes on your position. You have at least 3 sniper teams waiting for you in that pass." "Reynolds!" Hayes's disbelief was evident even through the radio. "You're not authorized for this operation. Clear this channel immediately." "Lieutenant, listen to me. This is—" Reynolds was cut off as Hayes terminated the communication. "He's not going to listen," Emma said, adjusting her scope. "They're still moving into the kill zone." Reynolds' expression hardened. "Then we do this the hard way." He raised his binoculars, scanning the hillside where the nearest enemy spotter team was positioned. "North Ridge team range, 750 meters elevation, plus 20 meters wind from the west, at approximately 5 knots. Emma absorbed the information instantly, making minor adjustments to her scope. Through the magnified lens, she could now clearly see 2 men in camouflage, their rifles trained on the approaching SEAL team. For a split second, Emma hesitated. These would be her first shots in combat. Not at paper targets or deer in the Montana woods, but at human beings intent on killing American soldiers. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her, threatening to overwhelm. Then her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in her ear, "Breathe in, hold, then squeeze between heartbeats." Emma steadied herself, controlling her breathing as she'd been taught. The crosshairs settled on the first shooter, his profile clear against the rocky background. "Target acquired," she whispered. "Send it," Reynolds replied, his voice calm and professional. Emma's finger tightened on the trigger, applying steady pressure until the rifle bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the enemy shooter jerk backward, then collapse. His partner reacted immediately, scanning frantically for the source of the shot. Emma had already shifted her aim, compensating for the slight change in position. Her second shot rang out, finding its mark with deadly precision. "Both down," Reynolds confirmed. "Good shooting? Eastern team is reacting, trying to locate our position." Emma was already reorienting toward the second sniper team. These shooters were better protected, partially concealed behind rock formations. She would need to time her shots carefully. As she prepared to engage, the radio crackled to life. Lieutenant Hayes, his voice urgent. "OP, Charlie, this is Shark Lead. We're taking fire from the ridgeline. Say again your position." Reynolds keyed his mic. "We're on the western overlook. We've neutralized the northern sniper team, but you've got at least 2 more positions targeting you." There was a brief pause then. "Acknowledged. We're falling back to defensive position Alpha. Request immediate fire support." "Working on it," Reynolds replied. "Be advised we believe Victor Kozlov is on site. Repeat, Victor Kozlov is on site." "Who the hell is Victor Kozlov?" Hayes demanded. "The man who set this trap," Reynolds said grimly. "And he's very, very good at what he does." As if to punctuate his words, a bullet struck the rock just inches from Emma's position, sending stone fragments flying. Reynolds ducked instinctively. "He's spotted us," he hissed. Emma rolled to her left, quickly repositioning. Through her scope, she caught a glimpse of movement on the distant ridgeline, a shadowy figure in a ghillie suit, almost indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. "I have eyes on Kozlov," she said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through her system. "Range approximately 900 meters. "Extreme range for that rifle," Reynolds warned. Emma's mind was already calculating. Distance, wind speed, bullet dropped the slight uphill angle. She made rapid adjustments to her scope. "I can make it," she said with quiet confidence. Another shot rang out closer this time. Kozlov was zeroing in on their position with frightening accuracy. "Take the shot if you have it," Reynolds urged, keeping his binoculars trained on the distant figure. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. She could see Kozlov more clearly now. A man in his 40s, his movements deliberate and precise, as he adjusted his own rifle. For a moment, it felt as though they were looking directly at each other, across the vast distance, 2 hunters acknowledging each other's presence. Then Kozlov shifted slightly, bringing his rifle to bear. He was preparing to fire again. Emma's finger tightened on the trigger. The M110 barked its report, echoing across the valley. Through her scope, she saw Kozlov jerk backward. Not a kill shot. He'd moved at the last instant, but he was hit. As she watched, he rolled behind cover, disappearing from view. "You got him," Reynolds confirmed. "Shoulder hit looks like. He's retreating." Emma allowed herself a moment of relief, but it was short-lived. The radio crackled again. Lieutenant Hayes, his voice tight with controlled panic. "OP, Charlie, we have men down. Repeat, 2 men down. Need immediate medevac." Reynolds grabbed the radio. "Shark Lead, what's your situation? Eastern Sniper Team has us pinned down. Can't reach our wounded. Need that shooter neutralized now. Emma was already shifting position, scanning for the Eastern team that had engaged the SEALs. Through her scope, she spotted them. Two shooters in elevated positions raining fire down on Hayes and his team, who were trapped in the narrow confines of the valley floor. Range 830 meters, Reynolds provided. Wind shifting now from the northwest 8 knots. Emma made the necessary adjustments, then began to systematically engage the targets. Her first shot struck one of the snipers' center mass. The second shooter immediately ducked behind cover, but Emma held her position, waiting patiently. Seconds stretched into a minute, then 2. The Eastern shooter remained hidden. "He's not going to expose himself," Reynolds muttered. "Smart," Emma thought quickly, recalling one of her grandfather's lessons. "Flush him out," she said, adjusting her aim to target a loose rock formation near the shooter's position. Her next shot struck the rocks, sending debris cascading down. Instinctively, the shooter shifted position to avoid the falling stones, and in that moment, exposed himself just enough. Emma's final shot found its mark. The Eastern shooter collapsed, his rifle tumbling down the rocky slope. "Clear," Reynolds confirmed. "Shark-led Eastern shooters neutralized. Advise you extract immediately. We'll cover your withdrawal." As Hayes and his team began to move their wounded toward the extraction point, Emma continued to scan the surrounding ridgelines, alert for any sign of Viktor Kozlov. But the wounded sniper had vanished, leaving behind only blood-stained rocks as evidence of their encounter. "He's gone," Reynolds said after a thorough search with his binoculars. "But he'll be back. This isn't over." Emma nodded grimly, understanding the truth in his words. Today she had become a hunter, and in doing so had made herself the hunted. Viktor Kozlov would not forget the woman who had wounded him, just as his father had never forgotten William Morgan. As the sound of approaching medevac helicopters filled the air, Emma began to methodically pack up her equipment. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her mind was racing. In the span of a few hours, she had transformed from a supply specialist to a combat sniper, had taken lives, had saved lives, had stepped into a world her grandfather had tried to both prepare her for and protect her from. And somewhere out there, a wounded Viktor Kozlov was planning his next move in a deadly game that had begun decades before Emma was born. A game she was now irrevocably part of. "What happens now?" she asked quietly, as they prepared to return to base. Reynolds's weathered face was solemn as he surveyed the blood-stained battlefield below. Now we get ready for War Mouse. The kind they don't teach you about in basic training." He turned to face her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and regret. "The real question is, are you ready for what comes next?" Emma thought of her grandfather's journal, of the legacy he had left her, of the skills he had painstakingly taught her throughout her childhood. She thought of Lieutenant Hayes and his men, who would be dead now if she hadn't acted. "I was born ready," she replied, slinging the rifle over her shoulder as they began the long walk back to the waiting Humvee. "Grandpa made sure of that." The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Condor fell silent as Emma Morgan and Captain Jack Reynolds entered. Lieutenant Hayes and his surviving team members sat around a rectangular table, their faces etched with exhaustion and barely concealed anger. Two empty chairs served as stark reminders of the wounded SEALs now in the medical evacuation helicopter bound for Bagram Airfield. Base Commander Colonel Patricia Chen stood at the head of the table, her expression unreadable as she gestured for Emma and Reynolds to take seats. At 48, Chen was a career officer who had risen through the ranks during a time when women in combat leadership positions were still a rarity. The silver streaks in her dark hair and the permanent lines etched around her eyes spoke of decades of hard-earned experience. "Let's get one thing straight," Chen began, her voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "What happened today was both a catastrophic intelligence failure and an unprecedented success. We walked into a trap, but thanks to some unorthodox actions, we avoided losing an entire SEAL team." Her gaze shifted to Emma. "Specialist Morgan, you directly disobeyed orders by taking up a sniper position without authorization. Under normal circumstances, that would mean an immediate court-martial." Emma sat ramrod straight, her face composed despite the knot of tension in her stomach. "However," Chen continued, "these are not normal circumstances. Lieutenant Hayes has informed me that your actions saved his entire team. 3 confirmed hostile snipers eliminated, and you managed to wound a 4th, who we now believe was indeed Viktor Kozlov, based on blood samples recovered from the scene." Hayes looked up, meeting Emma's gaze for the first time. The arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by something more complex, a reluctant respect mingled with wounded pride. "You were right about the ambush," he admitted grudgingly. "If you and Captain Reynolds hadn't shown up—" He left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Colonel Chen tapped a file folder on the table. "Captain Reynolds has filled me in on the background regarding Kozlov, both father and son, and the historical connection to your grandfather's specialist Morgan." She paused, studying Emma with new intensity. "What I need to know now is, how did a supply specialist with no formal sniper training manage to outshoot professional killers at ranges exceeding 800 meters? The room fell silent again, all eyes on Emma. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her grandfather's legacy pressing down on her shoulders. "My grandfather was William Morgan, ma'am, former Marine Corps sniper and, later, CIA operations specialist." Emma's voice grew steadier as she continued. "He raised me after my parents died, taught me to shoot from the time I could hold a rifle. Hunting at first, but later, other skills." She glanced at Reynolds, who nodded encouragingly. "Captain Reynolds served with my grandfather during the Cold War. They were part of a special operations unit targeting Soviet assets in Europe." Emma hesitated, then added, "including Ivan Kozlov, Viktor's father." Colonel Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. "And you believe Viktor Kozlov is now continuing some sort of vendetta?" "The evidence supports it," Reynolds interjected. "The trap was too elaborate for a random engagement. The positioning of the snipers, the selection of the terrain, it all matches Ivan Kozlov's tactics, as documented in William Morgan's field notes. Viktor has clearly studied his father's methods." Chen considered this information, her fingers drumming lightly on the table. "So what you're saying is that we not only have a highly trained enemy sniper operating in our area, but one with a personal motivation to target American forces, specifically forces connected to Specialist Morgan." "Yes, ma'am," Reynolds confirmed. Chen turned to Lieutenant Hayes. "And your assessment of Morgan's performance today?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Exceptional," he admitted. 3 shots, 3 kills at extreme range under combat conditions, and a 4th shot that wounded Kozlov, a target that was using advanced concealment techniques. He looked directly at Emma. "Most qualified snipers couldn't have done better." Colonel Chen fell silent, weighing options. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone awaited her decision. "Specialist Morgan," she said finally, "I'm temporarily reassigning you to Special Operations Support, effective immediately. You'll work directly with Captain Reynolds to track and neutralize the Kozlov threat." She raised a hand to forestall any objections. "This is highly irregular, but so is having a Russian assassin with a personal vendetta operating in our AO. Emma felt a mixture of relief and apprehension wash over her. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet," Chen replied grimly. "If Kozlov is targeting you specifically, I'm putting you directly in harm's way. But better to confront this threat proactively than wait for him to strike again." As the meeting concluded, Hayes approached Emma in the corridor outside. "I owe you an apology, Morgan," he said stiffly. "I dismissed your concerns, and it nearly got my team killed." Emma nodded, accepting the apology without comment. Hayes studied her for a moment longer. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Really, your grandfather was good, I'm sure. But what you did today—" He shook his head in disbelief. "My grandfather used to say that shooting isn't just about aim," Emma replied quietly. "It's about patience, about understanding the wind, the distance, how the earth curves beneath your bullet." She met Hayes's gaze steadily. "About respecting that, when you pull that trigger, you're making a choice that can't be undone." A flicker of newfound respect crossed Hayes's face. "You'll need a spotter if you're going after Kozlov, someone who knows the terrain, who understands special operations protocols." "You volunteering, Lieutenant?" Hayes almost smiled. "My team's down 2 men. We're grounded until replacements arrive. So yeah, maybe I am." Emma nodded, surprised but grateful. The alliance was unexpected, but hunting someone like Viktor Kozlov would require all the help they could get. That night, alone in her quarters, the adrenaline of the day finally wore off, leaving Emma shaking. She sank onto her bunk, her mind replaying each shot, each life she'd taken. In the heat of battle, there had been no time for doubt or moral questioning, only the mechanical process of acquiring targets, calculating variables, and squeezing the trigger. Now, in the quiet darkness, the full weight of what she'd done settled on her shoulders. 3 men dead by her hand. Their faces flashed before her eyes, strangers whose lives she'd ended, with clinical precision. She hadn't hesitated, hadn't flinched. Her grandfather had taught her well. Too well, perhaps. Emma reached for William Morgan's journal, seeking solace or wisdom from the man who had prepared her for this moment. She turned to a passage she hadn't noticed before, tucked between operational notes. "There is a cost to what we do. Each shot taken exacts a price from the shooter as surely as from the target. Some say you lose a piece of your soul with each life taken. I don't know about souls, but I know about the weight, the invisible burden that grows heavier with each trigger pull. You carry that weight forever. The trick is learning to stand straight despite it." Emma closed her eyes, feeling that weight settling into her bones. When she finally drifted into troubled sleep, her dreams were filled with crosshairs and falling bodies, and a shadowy figure with Viktor Kozlov's face watching her from distant ridgelines. Dawn broke with the sound of helicopter rotors as a Black Hawk touched down on the base's landing pad. Emma, already awake after a restless night, watched from the barracks doorway as a figure descended from the aircraft. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp, and the weathered complexion of someone who had spent decades in harsh environments. "Mark Chen," Reynolds said, appearing beside her. "CIA Special Activities Division. Patricia Chen's ex-husband and one of the agency's top analysts on Russian operations." Emma glanced at him in surprise. The colonel called in her ex-husband. When it comes to national security, Chen puts personal feelings aside. Reynolds explained, "Mark is the foremost expert on the Kozlov network. If anyone can help us understand what we're dealing with, it's him." An hour later, they gathered in a secure briefing room: Emma, Reynolds, Hayes, Colonel Chen, and the newly arrived CIA operative. Mark Chen moved with the measured precision of a man who had spent more time behind a desk than in the field, but his eyes held the sharp intelligence and wariness of a veteran operative. Viktor Kozlov, he began without preamble, placing a file on the table. Born 1973 in Moscow to Ivan Kozlov and Elena Petrova. His father was KGB attached to Department 13, their assassination division. Viktor followed in his footsteps, joining Spetsnaz at 18, then FSB Special Operations after the Soviet collapse. He spread several surveillance photos across the table, grainy images showing a tall, powerfully built man with cold eyes and a thin scar bisecting his left eyebrow. In 2003, he went off the grid, surfaced again in 2007 as a freelance operator, primarily in Chechnya and Georgia. Since then, he's worked for various non-state actors, terrorist groups, warlords, drug cartels. Anyone with enough money and a need for specialized killing. Mark tapped one of the photos Kozlov in desert camouflage rifle in hand. He's confirmed to have eliminated at least 17 high-value targets for his clients, most at ranges considered extreme even by special operations standards. His longest confirmed kill was at 640 meters in crosswinds exceeding 15 knots. He looked up, his gaze settling on Emma. Until yesterday, no one had ever landed a shot on him. Emma felt a chill at the implication. So now I'm a trophy he needs to claim. Worse, Mark replied grimly. Based on our intelligence, the man you eliminated yesterday wasn't just another spotter. It was Alexei Kozlov, Viktor's younger brother. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "You're saying I killed his brother," she whispered. Mark nodded, making this very, very personal for him. "Viktor was already hunting you because of your connection to William Morgan. Now—" He spread his hands, the gesture eloquent in its simplicity. "So what's our next move?" Hayes asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Reynolds leaned forward. "We take the fight to him. Kozlov is wounded, not severely, but enough to slow him down. We need to track him before he has time to regroup." Mark shook his head. Wounded or not, going after Viktor Kozlov in his own territory is suicide. He knows these mountains better than you do, has probably already prepared multiple fallback positions. "So we just wait for him to come after Emma again?" Hayes demanded. "No," Mark replied calmly. "We prepare Emma to face him on equal terms." All eyes turned to Emma, who straightened under their collective gaze. "What are you suggesting?" "Fort Benning," Mark said simply. "The Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, the Army's elite sniper school. Normally it takes months to get a slot and years to qualify, but I've made some calls. They're expecting you next week." Emma blinked in surprise. "Sniper school, but that's exactly what you need," Reynolds interjected. "You've got natural talent and your grandfather's training, but Kozlov has decades of professional experience. To beat him, you need every advantage we can give you." Colonel Chen nodded in agreement. "Consider it done. Specialist Morgan will be temporarily assigned to Fort Benning for accelerated sniper training." She turned to Emma. "You leave tomorrow. Make the most of it, lives depend on your success." As the meeting adjourned, Reynolds pulled Emma aside. "There's something else you should know," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Mark didn't tell the whole story about Kozlov. After you wounded him yesterday, we found something at his abandoned position." He handed her a small weathered photograph, creased and worn from years of handling. Emma looked down at the image of a young woman standing beside an older man in military uniform. With a shock, she recognized her grandfather, decades younger, and beside him. "That's my mother," she whispered. Reynolds nodded grimly. Taken in Berlin, 1983. Koslov has been tracking your family for longer than you've been alive, Emma. This isn't just about you or even about William. This is about erasing the Morgan line entirely. Emma stared at the photograph, her mother's smiling face, looking back at her from across time. A mother she barely remembered who had died along with her father in what had been ruled an accidental car crash when Emma was only 5. Was their death really an accident? She asked, the terrible possibility suddenly clear. Reynolds's silence was answer enough. Fort Benning sprawled across the Georgia landscape, its training grounds stretching for miles under the merciless southern sun. Emma stood at attention in a line of 31 other candidates, 30 men and 1 other woman, as Sergeant Major Michael Wilson paced before them, his weathered face set in a perpetual scowl. At 55, Wilson was a legend in the special operations community, 27 years of service, including stints with Delta Force, and as the senior enlisted advisor to Joint Special Operations Command. His close-cropped gray hair and the network of scars on his forearms spoke of decades of hard-earned experience. "Look to your left," he barked, his voice carrying across the training yard. "Now, look to your right. By the end of this course, at least one of those people won't be here, possibly both." He stopped directly in front of Emma, his eyes narrowing as he took in her small frame. "Specialist Morgan," he said, his voice deliberately loud enough for everyone to hear. "Our special guest came here on a CIA recommendation, I understand. Tell me, Specialist, do you think that makes you special? Do you think that means I'm going to go easy on you?" Emma met his gaze unflinchingly. "No, Sergeant Major." "Good answer," Wilson replied, though his scowl didn't soften. "Because I don't care who sent you or why. In my course, everyone earns their place or they wash out. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, Sergeant Major." Wilson continued his pacing, addressing the entire group again. "The Special Operations Target Interdiction course is not about teaching you to shoot. If you can't shoot already, you don't belong here. This course is about turning shooters into hunters, predators, who can track, stalk, and eliminate high-value targets under the most adverse conditions imaginable." He gestured to the training grounds beyond. "Over the next 6 weeks, you will learn to become invisible, to read the wind like it's whispering in your ear, to calculate complex ballistic equations in your head while lying motionless for 12 hours in freezing rain or blistering heat, to make shots that most people would consider impossible." His gaze swept over the assembled candidates. "Some of you are here because your unit selected you as the best they had to offer. Others are here because you think you have something to prove." His eyes lingered on Emma for a moment. "All of you are here because someone somewhere believes you have what it takes to become elite snipers. My job is to find out if they were right." As Wilson dismissed them to their barracks, Emma felt the stares of the other candidates. Most were curious, some openly skeptical of the small woman in their midst. Only one, a tall Marine Staff Sergeant named Mark Williams, offered a friendly nod as they were assigned to the same training squad. "Don't mind Wilson," Williams said quietly as they stowed their gear. "He treats everyone like that at first. By week 3, if you're still here, he'll know your name." Emma managed a small smile. "I'm not worried about Wilson. I'm worried about keeping up with all of you." She gestured to the other candidates, most of whom towered over her and outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. Williams shrugged. "Size isn't everything in this game. I've seen big guys wash out because they couldn't lie still for hours, or because they flinched at the wrong moment. The best sniper in my last unit was 5'7" and skinny as a rail." His easy confidence was reassuring, but as Emma organized her footlocker, she couldn't shake the awareness of what was really at stake. The other candidates were here to advance their careers or earn a prestigious qualification. She was here because a killer was hunting her, a killer she needed to stop before he claimed more lives. The first week of training was brutal by any standard. Each day began at 04:30, with punishing physical training, 5-mile runs in full gear, crawling exercises through mud and sand, hours of holding stress positions that left muscles quivering and minds screaming for relief. Wilson pushed them relentlessly, paying particular attention to Emma. He assigned her the heaviest pack during endurance marches, criticized her technique more harshly than the others, and seemed determined to find her breaking point. "You think this is hard, Morgan?" he shouted, as she struggled through her 50th push-up, arms trembling with fatigue. "Try holding your position for 18 hours while monsoon rains soak through your clothes and insects crawl across your face. Try maintaining your aim while your muscles are cramping so bad you want to scream. That's what real snipers do." Emma gritted her teeth and continued, refusing to quit. Each night, she collapsed onto her bunk, physically exhausted, but mentally reviewing everything she'd learned. Watching, analyzing, adapting, just as her grandfather had taught her. By the end of the first week, 3 candidates had dropped out. Emma remained, earning grudging respect from her peers and a slightly less hostile attitude from Wilson. The second week focused on fieldcraft, the art of moving undetected through various terrains, constructing hide positions, and utilizing natural camouflage. Here, Emma's smaller size and lighter footprint became advantages. She excelled at creating minimal disturbance when moving through dense vegetation, and her hide positions were consistently rated among the best in the class. During a particularly challenging exercise, constructing a ghillie suit from scratch and remaining undetected while master instructors searched for them, Emma managed to position herself so effectively that she was the last candidate found, earning her first genuine nod of approval from Wilson. "Not bad, Morgan," he admitted grudgingly. "Your grandfather taught you well." Emma looked up in surprise. "You knew my grandfather?" Wilson's weathered face softened almost imperceptibly. "William Morgan, yeah, I knew him. He was my first sniper instructor back when I was a green recruit, not much older than you are now." A rare smile briefly crossed his features. "Toughest son of a bitch I ever met, but the best shooter, too. Could put 5 rounds through the same hole at 800 meters, then tell you exactly how the wind was going to shift before it happened." Emma felt a surge of pride, followed by a pang of loss. "He never mentioned teaching at Fort Benning." "He wouldn't have," Wilson replied. "It wasn't an official posting, more of a special arrangement between certain agencies." He gave her a knowing look. "Your grandfather moved in classified circles specialist, just like the man who's hunting you now." Emma stared at him, taken aback. "You know about Kozlov?" Wilson nodded grimly. "Captain Reynolds briefed me before you arrived. Why do you think I've been riding you so hard? You're not here to earn a qualification, Morgan. You're here to learn how to stay alive." His voice dropped lower. "And how to end a threat that's been hanging over your family for decades." As the training intensified, Emma found herself developing a strange bond with Mark Williams. As her designated spotter during paired exercises, he complemented her shooting skills with his keen observational abilities and encyclopedic knowledge of ballistics. Where Emma relied on instinct and natural talent, Williams approached sniping as a science, meticulously calculating every variable. "Wind's shifting," he murmured during one training exercise, the two of them prone in tall grass, observing a target range through their scopes. 2 o'clock, about 7 knots now. That's going to push your shot about 3 inches left at this distance." Emma made the minor adjustment without comment, squeezing the trigger on her exhale. Through the scope, she watched the round strike exactly where she'd aimed despite the challenging crosswind. Williams whistled softly. "How do you do that?" The math says that shot should have drifted more. I don't just calculate the wind, Emma explained quietly. I feel it. The way it is moving across the grass in layers, the way it changes direction as it passes through those trees to our left. My grandfather called it reading the invisible rivers of air. Williams shook his head in amazement. They can teach the science of shooting, but what you've got, that can't be taught. By the third week, the course had narrowed to 25 candidates. The training now focused on precision shooting under stress, both physical and psychological. Instructors would exhaust the students with grueling physical challenges, then immediately place them in shooting scenarios that required absolute precision. After a 10-mile forced march carrying 80-pound packs, Emma and the remaining candidates were ordered to set up firing positions on a windswept ridge. Their targets were placed at varying distances from 400 to 200 meters. To make matters worse, artificial sound generators created battlefield noise, and instructors periodically doused them with water to simulate rain. "You have 1 round per target," Wilson announced, pacing behind the firing line. "Miss once you're done for the day. Miss twice you're done with the course." Emma settled into position, her muscles screaming from the march, her hands slightly numb from the cold water. She forced herself to focus, to shut out the discomfort and the distractions, to find that place of perfect calm her grandfather had taught her to access. Her first shot struck dead center. So did her second, and her third. By her fifth perfect shot, even Wilson looked impressed. That night, however, the accumulated stress and trauma finally caught up with Emma. She woke gasping for breath, her sheets soaked with sweat, the images from her nightmare still vivid. Viktor Koslov, standing over her parents' wrecked car. Alexei Koslov's face as her bullet struck him. An endless field of bodies all felled by her hand. She slipped outside the barracks, seeking fresh air and solitude. The night was clear, stars scattered across the Georgia sky like diamond dust. Emma sat on a concrete barrier, hugging her knees to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. "Nightmares." The voice came from behind her. She turned to find Wilson approaching, a mug of coffee in his hand. Emma nodded, too exhausted to deny it. Wilson sat beside her, his bulk making the concrete barrier seem smaller. "I'd be worried if you weren't having them," he said after a moment. "Taking a life changes you. Taking multiple lives." He shrugged. "Let's just say I'd question the humanity of anyone who could do that without consequence." "My grandfather used to wake up screaming sometimes," Emma admitted quietly. "He'd never talk about it the next day, but I heard him. Names I didn't recognize, places I'd never heard of, apologizing over and over." Wilson nodded. "The weight never goes away completely. You just learn to carry it better." He took a sip of his coffee. "But here's what your grandfather might not have told you, that weight also keeps you human. The day it stops bothering you is the day you become something else entirely, something dangerous." He turned to look at her directly. "I've been watching you, Morgan. You're technically brilliant, maybe the most naturally gifted shooter I've seen since your grandfather. But what sets you apart isn't your aim. It's your restraint. The way you think before you pull the trigger, even in training scenarios." Emma considered his words. "Is that enough against someone like Kozlov?" "Kozlov is a predator," Wilson replied grimly. "Skilled, patient, ruthless. But he's missing something crucial." "What's that?" "A conscience," Wilson said simply. "He kills because he enjoys it, because it feeds something broken inside him. You kill because you have to protect others." He stood, preparing to leave. "Don't underestimate the power of that difference, Morgan. It might be your greatest advantage." As he walked away, Wilson called over his shoulder, 0500 tomorrow. Extreme distance shooting. Bring your A-game. The following weeks blurred together in a grueling cycle of increasingly difficult challenges. Long-range stalking exercises where candidates had to approach targets undetected across open terrain. Night shooting using various optics systems. Hostage scenarios requiring split-second decision-making and absolute precision. Throughout it all, Emma continued to excel, transforming from a natural talent into a disciplined professional. Her partnership with Williams strengthened as well, the two of them consistently outperforming the other teams in paired exercises. On the rare occasions when they had downtime, Williams would share stories of his deployments as a Marine, carefully edited, Emma suspected to omit classified details. In return, she told him about growing up in Montana, about hunting trips with her grandfather, about learning to read the wind by watching how it moved through fields of tall grass. "Your grandfather sounds like quite a man," Williams remarked one evening as they cleaned their rifles side by side. "He was," Emma agreed, her fingers moving automatically through the familiar maintenance routine. "Tough but fair. Never raised his voice, never had to. When he was disappointed in me, I could see it in his eyes, and that was worse than any punishment." Williams nodded in understanding. "Military family through and through, huh?" Emma hesitated, considering how much to reveal. "Not just military. After Korea, my grandfather worked for other government agencies, operations that never made it into official records." "CIA," Williams said matter-of-factly. At Emma's surprised look, he shrugged. "It's not hard to put together. The special treatment you're getting here, the accelerated training. Something big is going on, and it's not just about qualifying a new sniper." Emma studied him for a moment, then made a decision. "What I'm about to tell you is classified. If you repeat it, I'll deny everything." Williams set down his cleaning rod, giving her his full attention. "Understood." Over the next hour, Emma explained everything, her grandfather's history, with Ivan Kozlov, the attack on the SEAL team, her killing of Alexei Kozlov, and Victor's apparent vendetta against her family. Williams listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. "So that's why you're here," he said finally. "You're not just training to become a sniper. You're preparing for a specific mission, eliminating Victor Kozlov before he eliminates you." Emma nodded. "And I have about 3 more weeks to learn everything I need before I go back to Afghanistan to face him." Williams was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he picked up his cleaning rod again, resuming work on his rifle with methodical precision. "Well," he said casually, "in that case, we'd better make sure you graduate at the top of the class, hadn't we?" Emma smiled, grateful for his unwavering support. "I suppose we should." The final week of training culminated in a comprehensive field exercise, a 5-day mission requiring candidates to infiltrate a simulated hostile territory, locate high-value targets, and eliminate them without being detected by the opposing force of experienced instructors playing the role of enemy combatants. Emma and Williams were dropped at the edge of a densely wooded training area with minimal equipment, their rifles enough food and water for 3 days, deliberately insufficient for the 5-day exercise, basic navigation tools, and their ghillie suits. Their mission brief was simple, but challenging. Eliminate 5 specific targets spread across 20 square kilometers of rough terrain, then exfiltrate to a designated extraction point. They're testing not just our shooting, but our ability to prioritize targets, manage resources, and make tactical decisions under pressure, Williams observed as they established their first hide position to observe the training area. Emma nodded, studying the map they'd been provided. "If we move along this ridgeline, We can set up overlapping firing positions covering 3 of the 5 target areas. That minimizes our movement and exposure. For the next 3 days, they executed their plan with ruthless efficiency, moving only at night, establishing concealed positions during daylight hours. They systematically eliminated 4 of their 5 assigned targets. Their final objective, an instructor designated as a high-value enemy commander, was positioned in the most heavily defended area, a small compound at the center of the training ground. "This is the real test," Williams whispered as they observed the compound from a camouflaged position 800 meters away. "They've got at least 8 instructors playing enemy roles down there, constant patrols, and sensor equipment. No way to get closer without being detected." Emma studied the layout through her scope. "Then we don't get closer. We take the shot from here." Williams looked at her incredulously. 800 meters in these wind conditions with a target that's only visible for maybe 10 seconds at a time when he crosses between buildings. That's pushing the limits of what this rifle can do, Morgan. "Then we need to make sure we only need 1 shot," Emma replied calmly, already calculating angles and wind variables in her head. They settled in to wait, conserving their remaining water and food as the hours stretched on. By the evening of the 4th day, their target had established a pattern emerging briefly from the main building every 2 hours to confer with the patrol leaders. "Next appearance should be at 2200 hours, Williams murmured, checking his watch. "Wind's picking up, though. Going to be a tough shot." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the air currents against her skin, listening to the way the wind moved through the trees around them. When she opened them again, her face was set with determination. "I can make it," she said simply. As 2200 hours approached, they prepared for their final shot. Williams set up his spotting scope, whispering environmental readings to Emma as she made minute adjustments to her rifle. "Target's coming out," Williams breathed. "Wind steady at 7 knots, slight quartering from 4 o'clock. Emma settled deeper into her shooting position, controlling her breathing as she had countless times before. Through her scope, she tracked the instructor playing the enemy commander as he emerged from the building, walking briskly toward the assembled patrol leaders. Time seemed to slow as Emma prepared to take the shot. In her mind's eye, she saw not the instructor, but Viktor Kozlov, the man who had possibly killed her parents, who had orchestrated the ambush that wounded 2 SEALs who would continue killing until someone stopped him. Her finger tightened on the trigger, applying steady pressure until the rifle barked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she watched the target drop as the simulation round struck him squarely in the center of his chest. "Hit," Williams confirmed excitedly. "Perfect shot. Now let's get the hell out of here before they—" His words cut off abruptly as a twig snapped somewhere behind them. Both Emma and Williams froze, their training kicking in, as they remained absolutely motionless, barely breathing. The sound came again, closer this time, deliberate footsteps moving through the underbrush with professional stealth. Emma's heart hammered in her chest. Had the instructors somehow flanked them? Were they about to fail the exercise at the final hurdle? Slowly keeping her movements imperceptible, Emma shifted her gaze without moving her head, trying to locate the source of the sound. At the edge of her peripheral vision, she caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness of the forest. The shadow paused, seemingly studying their position. Then it moved again, circling their location with predatory patience. "We've been compromised," Williams breathed, his lips barely moving. "Instructor must have been tracking us." But something about the movement pattern struck Emma as wrong. The instructors, however skilled, were playing a training role. This shadow moved with different intent, not seeking to capture them for the exercise, but observing them with cold calculation. A sudden terrible certainty gripped her. "That's not an instructor," she whispered. Before Williams could respond, the shadow melted back into the forest as silently as it had appeared. For several long minutes they remained motionless, straining to detect any further movement. "What the hell was that?" Williams finally asked, his voice barely audible. Emma felt cold dread settling in her stomach. "I think we just had a visitor," she replied grimly. "Someone very interested in watching how I shoot." Kozlov. Williams's disbelief was evident even in his whisper. Here, on a secure military base. If he could infiltrate a forward operating base in Afghanistan, Fort Benning wouldn't be impossible. Emma began carefully packing their equipment, her movements deliberate and controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "We need to complete the exercise and report this immediately." Their extraction went smoothly, and by dawn of the 5th day, they had reached the designated pickup point, successfully completing their mission. As the instructors debriefed the exercise, praising their performance as the top team in the course, Emma remained distracted, her mind replaying the encounter with the shadow in the forest. After the debriefing, she sought out Sergeant Major Wilson, pulling him aside to report what they'd experienced. Wilson's reaction was immediate and alarming. He ordered a full security sweep of the training area and placed the base on heightened alert. By that afternoon, Emma found herself in a secure conference room with Wilson, the base commander, and two stern-faced men in civilian clothes who introduced themselves as FBI counterintelligence specialists. "We found footprints matching your description of the encounter," one of the agents reported. "Professional operator moving with extreme caution. They disappear at the perimeter fence, cut clean through, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it." "Kozlov," Emma said with certainty. Wilson nodded grimly. "Looks that way. He's tracking you, Morgan, studying you, learning how you operate." "But why risk exposure just to watch me during a training exercise?" Emma asked, struggling to understand her enemy's strategy. "Because that's how predators hunt," Wilson replied, his weathered face grave. "They study their prey, learn patterns, identify weaknesses. Kozlov isn't just trying to kill you, he's preparing to outshoot you. And he's confident enough to risk infiltrating a U.S. military base to do it." The FBI agents exchanged glances. "We're implementing additional security measures immediately," one said, "and we recommend accelerating Specialist Morgan's graduation and return to Afghanistan. If Kozlov is bold enough to come here, he might be planning to strike before she completes her training." Wilson shook his head. "Morgan's training is already complete as far as I'm concerned. She's passed every test we've thrown at her, outperformed candidates with years more experience." He looked directly at Emma. "You're ready, Specialist. As ready as we can make you." That evening, as Emma packed her gear for immediate deployment back to Afghanistan, Williams appeared at her barracks door. "Just heard the news," he said, leaning against the door frame. "You're shipping out tonight." Emma nodded, continuing to organize her equipment with efficient movements. "Orders came through an hour ago. Transport leaves at 2300. Williams watched her for a moment, then straightened. "I'm coming with you." Emma paused, looking up in surprise. "What? I've been temporarily assigned to your operation," Williams explained. "As your spotter. Orders came through right after they found evidence of the perimeter breach." He shrugged at her stunned expression. "What? You think I'm going to let you face this Kozlov character without proper backup? We're a team now, Morgan." For the first time in days, Emma felt a spark of hope breaking through her grim determination. "Thanks, Williams," she said simply. He nodded, understanding everything she wasn't saying. Just doing my job. Besides, he added, with a small smile, someone's got to keep you from getting too cocky with that rifle of yours. As the transport plane carried them through the night sky toward Afghanistan, Emma stared out the small window at the darkness below. Somewhere out there, Viktor Kozlov was waiting for her, a hunter becoming the hunted, a predator facing another predator. But, unlike Kozlov, she wasn't alone. She had Williams at her side, Reynolds and Hayes waiting at the base, and the legacy of her grandfather guiding her hand. Most importantly, she had something Kozlov would never understand, a reason to fight that went beyond revenge or personal glory. Emma closed her eyes, her grandfather's voice echoing in her memory. The best shot isn't always the one you take, Emmy. Sometimes it's the one you wait for the perfect moment when everything aligns and you know with absolute certainty that this is why you were put on this earth. That moment was coming. Emma could feel it approaching with every mile the plane covered, with every beat of her heart. The final confrontation with Viktor Kozlov, a reckoning decades in the making. She was ready. The mountains of Afghanistan greeted Emma Morgan like old adversaries, harsh, unforgiving, and indifferent to the human dramas playing out across their ancient slopes. The pre-dawn light cast long shadows across forward operating base Condor as she and Williams disembarked from the transport helicopter, their gear slung over their shoulders. Captain Jack Reynolds waited on the tarmac, his weathered face tight with concern. Beside him stood Lieutenant Hayes, looking markedly different from when Emma had left, more subdued, a new scar, tracing a path from his left temple to his jawline. "Welcome back," Reynolds said, simply clasping Emma's hand firmly. "Glad to see Fort Benning didn't break you." Emma managed a tired smile. "Not for lack of trying, sir." She gestured to Williams. "This is Staff Sergeant Mark Williams, my spotter." Reynolds nodded in acknowledgement. "Good to have you, Williams. We need all the help we can get." His expression grew grimmer. "The situation has evolved since you left." As they walked toward the command center, Reynolds briefed them on recent developments. "We've had 3 more sniper attacks in the region, all bearing Kozlov's signature extreme-range shots, perfect execution targets specifically chosen to create maximum psychological impact." "Casualties?" Emma asked quietly. Hayes answered, his voice tight. 7 dead, 4 American, 3 Afghan Army, including Major Ali Rahman, the local Afghan commander who was coordinating our joint operations. Emma absorbed this grim news feeling, the weight of responsibility settling more heavily on her shoulders. "And Kozlov, any sign of him?" "Only what he wants us to see," Reynolds replied. "Intelligence indicates he's operating out of the eastern mountain ranges near the Pakistani border. Remote, difficult terrain, scattered with abandoned villages and cave systems from the Soviet era." They entered the command center where Colonel Chen was waiting with a grim-faced Mark Chen. The CIA analyst had set up what appeared to be a comprehensive intelligence operation, maps covering the walls, satellite imagery spread across tables, and multiple computer screens displaying various data feeds. "Specialist Morgan," Colonel Chen greeted her. "I hear you topped your class at Fort Benning. Sergeant Major Wilson sent a particularly glowing report." "I had good motivation, ma'am," Emma replied. Mark Chen stepped forward, gesturing to the assembled intelligence materials. "We've been building a comprehensive profile of Kozlov's operations since you left. Movement patterns, supply lines, possible support networks." He tapped one of the maps, indicating a remote valley nestled between towering peaks. "We believe his primary base is somewhere in this region, approximately 40 kilometers east of our position." Emma studied the map, taking in the challenging terrain. "What about his network?" You mentioned something called Red Storm before I left. Mark nodded, his expression grave. We've confirmed it exists. A loose coalition of former Soviet intelligence operatives and their descendants maintaining a shadow network across Central Asia, mostly engaged in arms trafficking and mercenary operations, but with a persistent anti-American agenda. He glanced at Reynolds, and a particular fixation on eliminating certain former CIA assets and their families. Like my grandfather, Emma said. And now me. Exactly, Mark agreed. But there's more. He pulled a file from his briefcase, spreading several photographs across the table. 3 days ago, one of our recon drones captured these images. Emma leaned forward, studying the grainy aerial shots of what appeared to be a small convoy moving through a mountain pass. Supply run. Look closer, Mark urged, pointing to one of the vehicles. Specifically at what they're transporting. Emma squinted at the image, then felt her blood run cold. The vehicle was carrying what appeared to be components for a sophisticated weapons system, one she recognized from her training. Is that a Kornet anti-tank missile system? She asked, incredulity creeping into her voice. Mark nodded grimly. Russian-made latest generation, capable of penetrating the armor of any vehicle in our arsenal. But more importantly, he paused, ensuring he had everyone's attention. Intelligence suggests Kozlov's group is planning to use it during the upcoming Veterans Memorial Ceremony at Bagram Airfield. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The ceremony, scheduled for 3 days from now, would bring together high-ranking military officers, diplomats, and Afghan officials to honor fallen soldiers from both nations. A target-rich environment, Hayes said quietly. Hundreds of potential casualties. Colonel Chen straightened her decision made. This is no longer just about Kozlov's vendetta against Specialist Morgan. This is an imminent threat to American and Afghan forces that must be neutralized. She turned to Emma. I'm authorizing a direct action mission to locate and eliminate Viktor Kozlov and his network before they can execute their attack. Emma nodded, the responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical weight. One more thing, Mark added, sliding a final photograph across the table. It showed a man in his 50s, with the ramrod posture of a career military officer, speaking with what appeared to be Kozlov. We've identified a potential mole within our intelligence network. Colonel Dmitry Baranov, officially a Russian military attaché in Kabul, but with suspected ties to former KGB networks. Reynolds leaned closer, studying the image. He would have access to our operational plans, movement schedules. Exactly, Mark confirmed. Which means we can't use standard protocols for this mission. No official briefings, no regular communications channels, no support from conventional forces. Colonel Chen's expression was stone. This operation doesn't exist. Officially, you'll be conducting routine reconnaissance patrols. Unofficially, she let the implication hang in the air. We're on our own, Emma finished for her. Not entirely, Hayes interjected. My team is still down 2 men, but the rest of us are operational. We'll back your play, Morgan. Emma glanced at him in surprise, noting the newfound respect in his eyes. Small team, maximum deniability. Reynolds nodded approvingly. Better odds of getting close, without being detected. Colonel Chen concluded the briefing with a final directive. You have 48 hours to locate and eliminate Kozlov before that missile system can be deployed. Whatever it takes, this threat ends now. As the meeting dispersed, Reynolds pulled Emma and Williams aside. There's something else you need to see, he said quietly, leading them to a secured storage area at the back of the command center. Using a key from around his neck, he unlocked a heavy cabinet revealing a sleek, matte black rifle case. "This arrived for you yesterday," Reynolds explained, opening the case to reveal a precision rifle. Emma didn't recognize a custom-built system with cutting-edge optics and modifications unlike any standard-issue weapon. "Courtesy of some old friends at Langley who remembered your grandfather." Emma lifted the rifle reverently, feeling its perfect balance. "What is this?" HYN 2010 enhanced sniper rifle, but heavily modified, Reynolds explained. "Carbon fiber barrel custom trigger assembly advanced ballistic computer integrated with the scope." He handed her a small box of ammunition. "And these experimental rounds with polymer-tipped projectiles. Greater accuracy at extreme ranges, even in variable winds." Emma checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, familiarizing herself with its unique features. "This changes things," she said softly. "With this system, I can engage targets beyond 1,500 meters effectively." "Which means you can take Kozlov before he even knows you're there," Williams observed, examining the rifle with professional appreciation. Reynolds nodded, his expression solemn. "That's the plan. But remember, Kozlov has spent decades perfecting his craft. He'll have countermeasures, backup plans, escape routes." He fixed Emma with an intense stare. "This isn't just about being a better shot, Morgan. It's about outsmarting a predator in his own territory." As they prepared to depart, Williams pulled Emma aside. "I did some digging into those Red Storm files," he said quietly. "There's something about Kozlov's background that doesn't add up." Emma looked at him questioningly. "What do you mean?" "According to official records, Ivan Kozlov died in 1989 car accident outside Moscow." Williams glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "But there's a gap in Victor's history, almost 3 years in the mid-90s, where he disappeared completely. No records, no sightings." "You think his father might still be alive?" Emma asked, the implication sending a chill down her spine. Williams shrugged. "I'm saying we might be dealing with more than just Victor. The Red Storm network goes deeper than anyone's admitting." Emma absorbed this troubling possibility, adding it to the complex puzzle they were facing. "We stick to the mission," she decided. "Find Kozlov, whichever Kozlov it is, and end this before more people die." Under cover of darkness, their small team departed FOB Condor in 2 unmarked vehicles, Emma and Williams in the lead, followed by Reynolds, Hayes, and 3 of his SEAL operators. They traveled without lights, using night vision equipment to navigate the treacherous mountain roads, pushing deep into territory where American forces rarely ventured. By dawn, they had established a forward operating position in an abandoned shepherd's hut, high on a mountainside, with commanding views of the valley where intelligence suggested Kozlov was based. While the SEALs secured the perimeter, Emma and William set up their observation post, methodically scanning the terrain below. Hours passed in tense silence as they mapped possible hiding spots, escape routes, and defensive positions. The valley was a natural fortress, steep slopes on 3 sides, a narrow entrance that could be easily defended, and countless caves and rock formations offering perfect concealment for snipers. "If I were hiding a missile system, I'd put it there," Williams murmured, indicating a cluster of abandoned buildings partially concealed by a rocky outcropping. "Natural cover, clear line of sight to the valley entrance, multiple escape routes." Emma nodded in agreement, marking the location on their tactical map. Through her high-powered scope, she continued systematically searching for signs of human activity, disturbed Earth, unusual movement patterns, anything out of place in the natural landscape. Near midday, she spotted something, a brief glint of metal from a cave entrance high on the opposite slope, quickly concealed. "Possible observation post," she reported quietly. 2 o'clock, approximately 900 meters cave entrance beneath the split rock formation. Williams adjusted his spotting scope, studying the location. "Confirmed. Someone's up there. Professional setup, just the edge of a scope, visible for a moment. Emma felt a prickle of awareness, the sensation of being watched by a fellow predator. "That's their counter-sniper," she said with certainty, positioned to cover the valley approaches. Reynolds joined them, studying the location through binoculars. "Can you take him from here?" Emma considered the shot, the range, the crosswinds swirling through the valley, the minimal target profile. "Negative. Not enough target exposure. We need to flank the position approach from above." Hayes, listening nearby, nodded in approval. "My team can create a diversion at the valley entrance. Draw attention while you two maneuver to a better firing position." The plan came together quickly. Hayes and his SEALs would stage a noisy reconnaissance patrol at the valley entrance, appearing to be a routine security operation. Meanwhile, Emma, Williams, and Reynolds would use the distraction to scale the ridgeline and approach the enemy observation post from an unexpected angle. As dusk approached, they moved into position. The climb was grueling, nearly vertical in places, with loose scree threatening to send them sliding down the mountainside with every step. Emma's lungs burned and her muscles protested, but she pushed forward, the weight of her rifle a constant reminder of what was at stake. They reached their designated firing position just as darkness fell, a small outcropping directly above the cave where the enemy observer was positioned. Below them, Hayes's team had begun their diversion vehicle, engines echoing through the valley as they made a show of setting up a checkpoint. "Target is active," Williams whispered, observing through his night vision scope. Single individual male using a Russian-made Dragunov SVD rifle with thermal optics, focused entirely on Hayes' position. Emma settled into her firing stance, adjusting the advanced scope on her new rifle. Through the thermal imaging, she could clearly see the heat signature of the enemy sniper, a ghostly white figure against the cooler background of the cave. "Range 120 meters, steep downward angle," Williams continued. "No significant wind factor at this distance." Emma calculated the shot factoring in the steep angle, which would affect the bullet's trajectory differently than a level shot. Her fingers settled on the trigger, applying gentle pressure. "Wait," Reynolds whispered urgently. "Don't take the shot yet. This is too easy." Emma froze her finger, easing off the trigger. "What do you mean?" "Kozlov is too smart to leave his perimeter security this vulnerable," Reynolds explained. "This feels like—" His words were cut short by a sharp crack from somewhere to their right. Something slammed into the rock near Emma's head, showering her with stone fragments. Instinctively, all three dropped flat against the ground. "Sniper," Williams hissed. 10 o'clock, different position. He was waiting for us. Emma's mind raced. The observer below had been bait-positioned specifically to draw them into a trap. Somewhere on the adjacent ridge, the real threat was now targeting them. "I'll draw his fire," Reynolds decided immediately. "You two find the shooter and take him out." Before they could protest, he was already moving deliberately, exposing himself for a split second before rolling to new cover several meters away. Another shot rang out, striking where Reynolds had been moments before. The muzzle flash briefly illuminated a position on the opposite ridge, just enough for Emma to get a bearing. "I have approximate position," she whispered to Williams. "Range about 600 meters elevation, slightly above us, behind that distinctive rock formation shaped like a thumb." Williams was already adjusting his scope. "I see it. No thermal signature. He must be using a heat shield." Emma recalibrated her rifle for the new target, her mind cool and focused, despite the danger. This was what she had trained for, a high-stakes duel with an opponent who matched or exceeded her skills. "He'll be relocating after those shots," she predicted. "Standard counter-sniper procedure." Williams nodded. 3 likely movement directions based on the terrain. Most probable is rightward, toward that cluster of boulders. Better cover multiple firing angles. Emma adjusted her aim accordingly, watching the likely path through her scope. For several long minutes, nothing moved. The night was still, the only sounds the distant rumble of Hayes' vehicles and the whisper of the wind through the rocks. Then, a shadow shifting against shadows, barely perceptible, even through the advanced optics. A figure moving with extraordinary stealth between cover positions exactly as Williams had predicted. "Target acquired," Emma breathed, making minute adjustments to her aim. "Send it," Williams confirmed. Emma's rifle barked, the sound echoing across the valley. Through her scope, she saw the shadow figure jerk and fall. For a moment, triumph surged through her until the figure rolled smoothly behind cover, clearly wounded, but still dangerous. "Hit, but not down," Williams reported. "Left shoulder or upper arm from the reaction. He's mobile." Emma was already reorienting, trying to predict the shooter's next move. A voice crackled over their radio, Hayes sounding urgent. "Multiple hostiles emerging from the valley structures, heavily armed. Looks like you stirred up the hornet's nest." Reynolds rejoined them, keeping low. "We need to move. Now. That shooter will have called for backup." As they began their tactical retreat, Emma made a split-second decision. "You two go. Link up with Hayes. I'm going after the shooter." "Absolutely not," Reynolds objected immediately. "We don't split up." "That shooter is Koslov," Emma insisted. "I wounded him. He's on the move, vulnerable. This might be our only chance." Williams looked between them, then made his decision. "I'm staying with Morgan. That's my job." Reynolds clearly wanted to argue further, but the sound of approaching vehicles from the valley below settled the matter. "You've got 2 hours," he conceded. "Then we come looking for you. Stay on comms." As Reynolds disappeared into the darkness, heading toward Hayes's position, Emma and Williams began their careful approach toward where the wounded shooter had disappeared. "How do you know it's Koslov?" Williams asked as they moved silently from cover to cover. "The movement pattern," Emma explained. "Exactly like my grandfather described in his journal. And the tactics, using a decoy to draw us in, positioning himself at extreme range, anticipating our approach route." She paused, checking their surroundings before continuing. "Only Koslov would have that level of patience and tactical awareness." They tracked the wounded sniper through the darkness, following the occasional blood droplet on rocks and disturbed soil that only trained eyes would notice. The trail led them higher into the mountains, toward a ridgeline that offered commanding views of the entire valley. "He's heading for a pre-established fallback position," Williams surmised, as they carefully negotiated the treacherous terrain. "Probably has supplies, communications equipment." Emma nodded in agreement, moving with heightened caution as they approached the ridge. The blood trail was becoming more pronounced. Koslov's wound was serious enough to hamper his movement, but not enough to stop a man of his determination. They found his fallback position just as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, a small naturally formed cave, with a narrow entrance perfectly positioned to observe the entire valley, while remaining nearly invisible from below. Blood smeared the rocks near the entrance. Williams studied the sign with professional assessment. "He's definitely injured, losing enough blood to affect performance, but still dangerous." He glanced at Emma. "How do you want to play this?" Emma considered their options. Assaulting the cave directly would be suicide. Even wounded Koslov would have the advantage of cover and prepared firing positions. Waiting him out wasn't viable, with Reynolds' 2-hour deadline ticking away. "We need to draw him out," she decided, "or at least confirm his position before we call in support." Williams nodded thoughtfully. "I have an idea." He removed his helmet and raised it slightly above a rock, just enough to be visible from the cave entrance. The response was immediate. A single shot rang out, striking the helmet and sending it flying. Williams ducked lower, a grim smile on his face. Confirmed. Active shooter in the cave. Still has enough strength and clarity to make accurate shots. Emma was already formulating a plan. I need you to work your way around to the left flank. There's a position about 50 meters up that overlooks the cave entrance. I'll keep him focused on this location. Williams looked dubious. You're talking about crossfire. That's risky without more personnel. It's our best option, Emma insisted. I'll maintain position here, make him think both of us are pinned down. You get the elevated angle, wait for my signal. Reluctantly, Williams agreed, moving off with careful stealth to circle around to the position Emma had indicated. Once alone, Emma settled in behind her rock cover, calculating angles and distances with methodical precision. The sky continued to lighten, bringing with it increased visibility, but also greater exposure. Emma could now clearly see the cave entrance, a dark slash in the gray-brown rock face, with nothing visible within its shadowed depths. Her radio crackled softly. In position, Williams reported. I have clear view of the cave entrance from above. No visual on target yet. Hold position, Emma instructed. I'm going to try something. And she removed her pack, carefully arranging it with her jacket to create a human-shaped silhouette behind a rock, about 10 meters to her right. Using a branch, she slowly raised the decoy, just enough to be visible from the cave. Another shot rang out immediately, striking the decoy. Emma noted the accuracy of the shot, the angle of impact, and, most importantly, the muzzle flash from within the cave. Now she had an exact firing position. Did you see it? She asked Williams quietly. Affirmative. Shooter is positioned just inside the entrance left side behind what appears to be a rock barricade. Minimal exposure. Emma calculated the shot difficult, but not impossible with her new rifle's capabilities. On my mark, I need you to put suppressing fire just above the cave entrance. Make him duck deeper inside. I'll take the shot when he repositions. Ready when you are, Williams confirmed. Emma took a deep breath, settling into her shooting stance. 3, 2, 1, mark. Williams opened fire, his rounds striking the rock face above the cave entrance, sending fragments and dust raining down. Through her scope, Emma saw movement within the cave, the shooter shifting position to avoid the debris. For just a fraction of a second, he exposed himself a shoulder part of his torso. It was enough. Emma's fingers squeezed the trigger, her rifle bucking against her shoulder as the round sped toward its target. Through the scope, she saw the impact center mass a kill shot by all standard metrics. She watched as the figure inside the cave collapsed. Target down. She reported, a strange mixture of triumph and hollowness washing over her. Williams maintained his covering position. Confirm kill before we approach. Emma kept her scope trained on the cave entrance, watching for any sign of movement. Minutes passed in tense silence. I'm going to check, she decided, finally beginning to move forward with careful tactical precision. Negative, Williams objected. Too risky. Let me go. I need you covering, Emma insisted. Keep me safe. Step by step, she approached the cave, her rifle at the ready. The blood trail was more pronounced here, dark smears across the rocks leading into the shadowed entrance. As she reached the threshold, she called out, Victor Kozlov, show yourself if you're still breathing. No response came from the darkness. Emma steeled herself and entered, allowing her eyes to adjust to the gloom. The cave was smaller than it had appeared from outside, just a natural hollow in the rock face, perhaps 20 feet deep. A man lay crumpled against the far wall, blood pooling beneath him. Emma approached cautiously, her rifle trained on the motionless figure. As she drew closer, She could see he was middle-aged, with the hardened physique of a career soldier and a face weathered by decades of harsh environments. Not Viktor Kozlov. Emma felt cold realization wash over her. "Williams," she called it into her radio. "It's not him. Repeat, the shooter is not Kozlov." "What?" Williams's confusion was evident even through the radio. "Who is it?" Emma studied the dead man's face, noting details that suddenly made terrible sense. "It's one of Kozlov's team. A decoy. Meant to keep us occupied while—" Her blood ran cold as the implications hit her. "Williams, it's a diversion. The missile, the ceremony." As if in response to her realization, the radio crackled with Reynolds' urgent voice. "Morgan Williams report, status immediately. We've got a situation developing." "Go ahead," Emma responded, already moving back toward the cave entrance. "We captured one of Kozlov's men. He talked. The missile isn't targeting the ceremony at Bagram. It's aimed at FOB Condor, specifically at a meeting scheduled for Oro 900 this morning. Colonel Chen visiting brass local Afghan leaders." Emma checked her watch, 8:37, less than 25 minutes. "Where's the launch site?" she demanded, breaking into a run as she exited the cave. "Based on the missile's range and terrain requirements, there's only one possible location," Reynolds replied. "The abandoned village at the head of the valley. We're moving that way now, but we're at least 15 minutes out." Emma surveyed the landscape, mentally calculating distances and routes. "I can make it in 10, she decided. "Williams, link up with Reynolds. I'm going after Kozlov." "Morgan, wait," Williams began, but Emma was already moving using the steep terrain to her advantage, half running, half sliding down the scree slopes toward the valley floor. The abandoned village appeared deserted at first glance, a cluster of crumbling stone buildings and collapsed roofs, relics of conflicts stretching back decades. Emma approached with extreme caution, using the terrain for concealment as she circled the perimeter. Through her scope, she methodically scanned each building, each shadow, each possible hiding spot. Nothing moved within the village, but her instinct screamed that she was not alone. Kozlov was here. She could almost feel his presence, like a disturbance in the air. Her radio remained silent. She'd switched it off to avoid any noise that might give away her position. Now it was just her rifle, and somewhere ahead, the man who had been hunting her family for decades. Emma settled into a covered observation position overlooking the village square. If the missile system was here, it would need a clear line of sight toward FOB Condor, which narrowed the possible locations significantly. The minutes ticked by. 0845 08. The meeting at Condor would be assembling now unsuspecting targets, gathering in what they believed was a secure location. Movement caught her eye, subtle, almost imperceptible. A shadow shifting within the ruins of what had once been the village's largest building. Through her scope, Emma could just make out the distinctive shape of a missile launcher partially concealed by camouflage netting. And beside it, a figure making final adjustments to the targeting system, Viktor Kozlov. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking him. Tall, powerfully built, despite his age, with the precise economical movements of a lifelong operator. This was the man who had orchestrated the ambush that had wounded Hayes's team, who had possibly killed her parents, who had hunted her across continents. Emma calculated the shot range, approximately 600 meters light crosswind from the east, slight upward angle. Under normal circumstances, an easy shot for someone of her skill level. But as she settled her crosshairs on Kozlov's chest, something held her back. The whole scenario felt wrong, too, exposed, too obvious. Viktor Kozlov had survived decades as a top-tier assassin by never allowing himself to be vulnerable. She scanned the surrounding area more carefully, and spotted it a second figure nearly invisible in a perfectly constructed hide position on the building's upper level. A counter-sniper positioned specifically to eliminate anyone who targeted Koslov at the missile launcher. 2 targets, 1 shot to take before the other reacted. Emma weighed her options. The counter-sniper was the immediate threat to her, but Koslov was moments away from launching the missile. The clock was ticking 0855 now. Her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in her ear, "Sometimes the best shot is the one you don't take. Sometimes you need to change the game." Emma shifted her aim to the missile launcher itself, specifically to the guidance system attached to its side. One precise shot there would render the weapon useless without the risk of detonation. She took a deep breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. Her round struck exactly where she'd aimed, sending sparks and fragments flying from the missile's control unit. Koslov dropped immediately, taking cover behind the launcher as the counter-sniper began scanning for the source of the shot. Emma was already moving, using the momentary confusion to relocate to a prepared secondary position she'd identified during her approach. From here, she had a different angle on the Building 1 that exposed the counter-sniper to her view. Without hesitation, she took her second shot. The counter-sniper jerked backward and disappeared from sight. Now it was just her and Koslov. Emma's radio crackled to life as she switched it back on. "Morgan, report status." Reynolds's voice tight with concern. "I've disabled the missile and eliminated 1 hostile," she responded quietly. "Koslov is contained in the main building but still active." "We're 5 minutes out," Reynolds replied. "Hold position." Emma was about to acknowledge when a voice called out from the ruins, deep-accented, carrying easily across the open space between them. "Emma Morgan, I know you're out there. We have unfinished business, you and I." Koslov's voice. He was deliberately revealing his position, challenging her. "Your grandfather couldn't finish this in Berlin," he continued. "Let's see if his granddaughter has what it takes." Emma didn't respond, maintaining her disciplined silence as she assessed the situation. Koslov was trying to draw her out, to engage her emotionally rather than tactically. "I knew William Morgan," Koslov called again after a moment. "A worthy adversary. He spared my father once. Did you know that? Had him in his sights, but couldn't pull the trigger because I was there, a child innocent." A harsh laugh followed. "Sentiment. It was his weakness. I wonder if you share it." Emma remained silent, but her mind was racing. The story matched what was in her grandfather's journal, but something felt off about Koslov's telling. "Your captain is a liar," Koslov continued, clearly trying to provoke her. "Reynolds was there in Berlin too. Ask him what really happened that night. Ask him why my father hunted your family for decades." Despite herself, Emma felt doubt creeping in. Reynolds had told her he'd been delayed at a checkpoint, that her grandfather had been forced to make the decision alone. Was there more to the story? "I have no quarrel with you, Emma Morgan," Koslov called, his voice shifting positions. He was moving within the building, making it harder to pinpoint his location. "This was never about you. It was about justice for a betrayal that happened before you were born." Emma caught a glimpse of movement through a broken window, Koslov changing positions again. She adjusted her aim, tracking him. "Your grandfather and Reynolds were not the heroes you think they were," he continued. "Operation Red Storm wasn't a Soviet plot. It was a CIA black operation gone wrong. My father discovered it, threatened to expose it. That's why they tried to eliminate him in Berlin." Emma's finger hesitated on the trigger. Could he be telling the truth? Was there another side to this story that Reynolds had concealed from her? Her radio crackled. "Morgan, don't listen to him," Reynolds's voice, urgent now. "He's trying to get in your head, make you hesitate. We're almost there. Just hold on." "Why should I believe you?" Emma called out, breaking her silence for the first time. Kozlov's reply was immediate, as if he'd been waiting for this opening. "Because I have proof. In my inside pocket. Documentation, original CIA files that my father recovered. The truth about Operation Red Storm, about what really happened in Berlin." Emma kept her scope trained on the building, considering her options. If Kozlov was lying, engaging with him was exactly what he wanted. If he was telling the truth, "Morgan, do not approach," Reynolds warned over the radio. "It's a trap." But something in Kozlov's voice, a conviction that transcended mere manipulation, made Emma hesitate. "I'm coming out," Kozlov called. "Unarmed. You can verify the documents yourself, then decide who deserves your loyalty." Before Reynolds could object further, a figure emerged from the ruined building, Kozlov, his hands raised, moving slowly into the open. Even at this distance, Emma could see he was injured, blood staining his left shoulder, where her bullet had struck him during their previous encounter. Through her scope, she could see his face clearly for the first time, weather-beaten, lined with age and hardship, but with eyes that held an unsettling intelligence. Not the cold eyes of a psychopath, but something more complex. "I'm lowering my right hand to retrieve the documents," he announced. "Watch carefully if you wish." Emma kept her crosshairs centered on his chest as he slowly reached inside his jacket. Her finger tightened fractionally on the trigger, ready to fire at the first sign of a weapon. But what Kozlov withdrew was a weathered leather folder. He held it up, then carefully set it on the ground before him. "The truth," he called. "About your grandfather, about Reynolds, about why your parents died. It's all there." Emma hesitated, torn between maintaining her tactical advantage and the pull of potential answers to questions that had haunted her since childhood. Her radio crackled again. "1 minute out," Reynolds reported. "Hold position." The urgency in his voice made Emma's decision for her. "Kozlov," she called out, "on your knees, hands behind your head, now." To her surprise, Kozlov complied immediately, sinking to his knees and lacing his fingers behind his head. His expression remained calm, almost resigned. "Your loyalty is admirable," he said as the sound of approaching vehicles reached them. "But misplaced. Ask Reynolds about Operation Red Storm. Ask him about the village of Norilsk. Ask him who gave the order that night in Berlin." Before Emma could respond, Hayes and his team came charging into the village, weapons trained on Kozlov. Reynolds was with them, his face grim as he approached the kneeling figure. "Victor Kozlov," Reynolds said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "After all these years." Kozlov's gaze shifted from Emma to Reynolds, his expression hardening. "Captain Reynolds, still hiding behind others, I see. Does she know what you did? What you ordered William Morgan to do?" Reynolds didn't respond, nodding instead to Hayes's men to secure the prisoner. As they zip-tied Kozlov's hands behind his back, Reynolds bent to pick up the leather folder. "Sir," Emma called out, finally emerging from her position. "What's in that folder?" Reynolds hesitated, glancing from the folder to Emma and back again. Something flashed across his face. Regret, perhaps, or something darker. "Forgeries," he said finally. "KGB disinformation designed to sow doubt among American operatives. I've seen this tactic before." "Then you won't mind if I take a look," Emma pressed, approaching slowly. Reynolds's grip on the folder tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is classified material specialist, even if it is forgery." The tension between them was palpable. Hayes and his men exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly sensing that something significant was unfolding. "Jack," a new voice interrupted. All heads turned to see Mark Chen approaching, having just arrived with the second vehicle. "Let her see it." Reynolds stared at the CIA analyst, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, with obvious reluctance, he handed the folder to Emma. With Williams now at her side, Emma opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of what appeared to be CIA operational directives, along with black and white photographs of a remote village bodies lying in the snow. One document in particular caught her eye, a mission authorization signed by a much younger Jack Reynolds, targeting not just Ivan Koslov, but an entire village suspected of harboring Soviet dissidents. Operation Red Storm, she read aloud. Authorized use of chemical agents on civilian population of Norilsk to test effectiveness against Soviet protective measures. She looked up at Reynolds, horror dawning. "You ordered this?" Reynolds' weathered face was unreadable. "It was a different time, Morgan. The Cold War was no excuse for what you did," Kozlov interjected from his kneeling position. "My father wasn't KGB. He was a Soviet military doctor who discovered what had been done to those people and threatened to expose it. Your grandfather was sent to silence him with you as his handler, Reynolds." Emma turned to the CIA analyst. "Is this true?" Mark Chen sighed heavily. "Some of it. Operation Red Storm was problematic even by Cold War standards. The official records were purged decades ago." "But my grandfather's journal," Emma protested. "It says Ivan Kozlov was KGB, that he had killed CIA assets." "William Morgan was given a cover story," Reynolds interrupted, his voice hollow. "He never knew the full parameters of the operation. He believed he was targeting a legitimate threat." Emma felt as if the ground were shifting beneath her feet. Everything she had believed about her grandfather, about her family's history, suddenly called into question. "So when my grandfather couldn't take the shot in Berlin," she began. "I ordered him to fire anyway," Reynolds admitted. "Even with the child present, William refused. It was the first time he'd ever disobeyed a direct order." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "He had more integrity than the rest of us put together." Emma looked back at Koslov, seeing him in a new light. "And my parents. Their car accident." Koslov shook his head. "Not my work. By then my father was already dead suicide when he realized he couldn't protect the truth or his family. I continued his mission, targeting those responsible for Norilsk, but William Morgan was never on my list. His only crime was following orders from men like Reynolds." Hayes, who had been listening in growing confusion, finally spoke up. "So all of this, the ambush, the missile, it was about Reynolds, not Morgan." "Reynolds was the primary target," Kozlov confirmed. "When I learned he was deployed here, working with William Morgan's granddaughter, it seemed fitting. Symmetry." Emma stood in stunned silence, trying to process everything she'd learned. The man she'd been hunting, the monster she'd built up in her mind, was instead a reflection of the very system she served. And Reynolds, her mentor, the man who had guided her through this entire ordeal, had been concealing his own sins all along. "What happens now?" she asked finally, looking between Reynolds and Koslov. It was Mark Chen who answered. "Now we clean this up. Officially, Viktor Kozlov was a terrorist targeting American forces who was neutralized during a special operation. The details of Operation Red Storm remain classified." He glanced at Reynolds. "And certain personnel will be immediately recalled to Langley for debriefing." Reynolds nodded once, accepting his fate without protest. "It's been a long time coming," he said quietly. As Hayes's men prepared to transport their prisoner, Emma approached Koslov one last time. "I'm sorry," she said simply, "for all of it." Koslov studied her face, his expression softening slightly. "You have your grandfather's eyes," he observed, "and his conscience, it seems. He was a good man caught in a bad system. Remember him for that, not for the lies they wrapped around him." As Koslov was led away, Williams joined Emma, concern evident on his face. "You okay?" Emma wasn't sure how to answer. The mission was complete. The threat neutralized, lives saved. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by revelations that had shattered her understanding of her own past. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything I thought I knew about my grandfather, about why my parents died, about this entire mission, doesn't change what you did," Williams pointed out. "You still saved lives today, whatever the truth about the past that stands." Emma nodded, drawing some comfort from his words. As they prepared to return to base, she took one last look at the abandoned village, a place where past and present had collided, where truths long buried had finally come to light. The weight of her grandfather's legacy remained, but it was different now, more complex, more human. In finding Viktor Koslov, she had also found a more nuanced truth about her family's history and her own place within it. 1 year later, Fort Benning, Georgia. Emma Morgan stood before a class of 20 sniper candidates, her posture relaxed but commanding. At 24, she was the youngest instructor in the Special Operations Target Interdiction Course's history, but the quiet authority she projected left no room for questioning her qualifications. "The most important shot you'll ever take," she told the attentive faces before her, "is the one you decide not to take." Sunlight streamed through the classroom windows, catching the single silver bar on her uniform, her recent promotion to first lieutenant still new enough to feel strange. "Snipers aren't just shooters," she continued, pacing slowly across the front of the room. "We're decision-makers, observers, the eyes and conscience of the battlefield." At the back of the classroom, a familiar figure leaned against the wall. Mark Williams, now a gunnery sergeant, his presence a comforting constant in Emma's transformed life. "Many of you came here believing this course is about learning to shoot at extreme distances," Emma said, noting the nods from several students. "It is, but more importantly, it's about learning when not to shoot, about understanding the weight of responsibility that comes with the ability to take a life from half a mile away." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the assembled candidates. 5 women among them now, a small but significant shift from when she had been one of only 2. "Each of you will face moments when you must make life or death decisions alone, with limited information, under extreme pressure. The technical skills we'll teach you here are only valuable if paired with something that can't be taught: judgment." Emma moved to the window, looking out at the Georgia landscape where her own transformation had begun a year earlier. So much had changed since then. Reynolds had disappeared into the labyrinthine bureaucracy of Langley, facing inquiries that remained classified. Viktor Koslov had been quietly transferred to a secure facility, then vanished from official records, though Emma occasionally received unsigned postcards from various Eastern European locations, each containing a single chess move, continuing a game they'd started during his brief detention. The truth about Operation Red Storm and her grandfather's role in it had been both painful and liberating. William Morgan had been neither the flawless hero she'd imagined nor a willing participant in the darker aspects of Cold War operations. He had been something more valuable, a man of conscience navigating an often unconscionable world, making hard choices and living with their consequences. "Before we begin the technical portion of today's class," Emma said, turning back to her students, "I want to tell you a story about my grandfather." The room fell silent, the candidates sensing the importance of what was to come. William Morgan was a Marine sniper who later worked for the CIA during the Cold War. He was given an order he couldn't morally follow to take a shot that would have killed not just his target, but potentially an innocent child. He refused that order, knowing it would end his career, possibly his freedom. Emma paused, the memory of her grandfather strong in this moment. "Years later, he told me something I've never forgotten. He said, The weapon doesn't make the sniper, Emmy. The ability to decide when not to pull the trigger, that's what separates the professionals from the assassins. She looked around the room, making eye contact with each candidate. During your time here, you'll learn to make incredible shots under impossible conditions. But the most important lesson I can teach you is the one my grandfather taught me. Every time you look through that scope, you're not just aiming at a target. You're making a moral choice that will live with you forever. After class, Williams joined her as she packed up her materials. "Good session," he commented. "You're making an impression on them." Emma smiled. "I hope so. They need to understand what they're really signing up for." "Speaking of which," Williams said casually, "I had an interesting conversation with the colonel this morning. Apparently, there's a situation developing in Eastern Europe. Something about former intelligence operatives resurfacing after decades underground." Emma looked up sharply. "Red Storm." Williams nodded. "Possibly. They're putting together a specialized team. Your name came up." Emma considered this feeling the familiar mixture of duty and caution that had become her constant companion. "When do they need an answer?" "Tomorrow," Williams replied. "But there's something else you should know. The mission lead is requesting you specifically." "Who is it?" Williams handed her a folder. "See for yourself." Emma opened it to find a mission brief with a familiar name listed as Tactical Advisor Jack Reynolds. "I thought he was done after the inquiries," she said, surprised. "Apparently not. Word is he's been helping identify and locate the remaining Red Storm network. This would be the final operation." Emma studied the brief emotions conflicting within her. Reynolds had deceived her, had concealed ugly truths about her family's past. But he had also mentored her, had recognized her potential when others dismissed her. "Are you going to take it?" Williams asked after a moment. Emma closed the folder, decision made. "One condition, you come as my spotter." Williams grinned. "Already packed." As they walked across the training grounds toward the administrative building, Emma felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun in the mountains of Afghanistan had led her here not just to a new rank and position, but to a deeper understanding of herself, her family legacy, and the complex moral landscape she navigated. She would meet with Reynolds, would hear what he had to say about this new mission. But she would make her own decisions guided by the lessons of the past year and the wisdom her grandfather had passed to her. The weight of the sniper's responsibility remained heavy on her shoulders. But now she knew how to carry it with grace and purpose, one careful step at a time, one conscientious decision after another. As the Georgia sun cast long shadows across Fort Benning's training fields, Emma Morgan walked toward her future, no longer just the ammunition carrier, no longer just her grandfather's granddaughter, but a woman who had found her own path through the crosshairs of duty and conscience. A sniper, not just in skill, but in spirit.